Hi, welcome to Financial Behavior Thought Leaders. I'm Mary, and this podcast takes you behind the scenes with top speakers in financial services. In this season, we're focusing on the future of financial conversations, how trust, communication, and decision-making are evolving, and what that means for the way we engage with money in your work and your life. Now, whether you're in financial services, you're planning events, or you're just simply navigating your own financial decisions, you're in the right space. Be sure to subscribe so you can get more just like this. Today, we're going to explore how big life transitions impact not just your finances, but also your identity. And because when life changes, and so does your money, that shift can feel disorienting in ways that go far beyond the bank account. So today, my special guest is Dr. Meghaan Lurtz, one of Financial Behavior Keynote Group speakers. Let's dive into her perspective, her keynote, and how this shows up in real ways. Happy to be here. Okay, to start us off, I want to kind of dive in to this question of what do you see changing right now in the way that people are thinking and talking about money that we really need to be paying attention to?
In preparing for this conversation today, Mary, I was thinking to myself, how do I want to answer that question? Because something that I've been thinking about a lot, whether it's people asking me, like clients of financial advisors, or my friends have been talking to me, or even some of my family members have been talking to me, that people are starting to think about, they're starting to spend money on, they're starting to consider and hire not just where can I get this advice from or who can I get this advice from, be it financial or something else, but like, do I like this person that I'm getting financial advice from, or do I like this person that I'm getting medical advice from? Am I really gonna genuinely enjoy talking to them? Are they just talking at me, or are they asking curious questions? Are they really listening? Are they providing thoughtful feedback, to like the doctor-patient scenario? Do they have good bedside manner? People are starting to think about this as a part of the hiring or finding, who they want to work with. And this has become even more important. Am I going to enjoy this experience? And so to maybe answer your question like more directly, people are thinking about and thinking about with their money, the relationships that surround it and that intertwine, within it, be it family, be it professional. How do I talk to my parents about this money situation in my own life or in their life? How do I find an advisor that is both a skilled technician, but also somebody that, makes me laugh and makes me feel comfortable, about my financial situation, about my financial knowledge. And so it's no longer just about advice and who gives the best advice. It's who gives advice that I actually want to talk to.
Yeah, I heard a speaker say a few months ago, actually, said, back in the day as financial advisors, we were giving people access to the market, access to investments, insurance, whatever the case may be, because that's the only way they could get access. Those days are gone, right? Yeah. We have now democratized access, and people can get access on their own. They don't need to go and work through an advisor. And so I love what you're saying there, because it really reverberates with me of the fact that it's not access that you're selling anymore. And it's not access that the person is buying. It's the person. And to me, that sets us apart from AI or anything else of the fact of the matter is they want you. If they're coming to you now, it's because they want you and all of you. Tell me a little more about that. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I even think about it, in my own life. I actively try to be a person, a colleague, a teacher to my students, a friend to my clients and my family, that people would actually want to talk to about money, about things that are hard, oftentimes during transitions. When I think a lot of us think, oh, I don't want to talk to anybody about that. I'm just going to go Google it on my own, and sort of like think my own thoughts and then read about it in 27 different places. We're really, I want to be a person that is open enough, that is thoughtful enough, that is a good enough listener, that people think, okay, I may do a little Googling, but then I'm going to call Meghaan, and I'm going to talk to her about what's going on. And I just think that goes through my mind a lot. Am I being the person that people want to talk to, not only about the difficult topic of money, but oftentimes even in a difficult transition that they are at the same time, trying to navigate.
So let's dive into the topic of transitions, because I think you come in with such a unique lens. You're a researcher, you're a professor, you're a practitioner. You've got a really unique lens on how this really affects people, and not just transitions, but how it impacts the financial transition. Because we as financial advisors talk about the financial transition part, but people don't feel it in that way. It's more the transitions. Can you talk more about what this means and what that looks like?
We transition all the time. There's divorce, there's retirement, there's empty nest, there's having a baby, there's a job and then a new job, there's caregiving, to one generation above you or one generation below you. Life's biggest transitions, certainly they have huge impacts on our bank account, but not only on our bank account. They change who we are. And so, depending on who at the moment, is listening to this, like, let's think about just loss of a spouse. This is probably the most painful, one of the largest transitions, if not the largest transition that we go to, maybe besides becoming a parent. And, a lot of times these individuals that are going through this, entering widowhood, they change friend groups, they develop new hobbies, they start to have different likes and dislikes than maybe they had, when they were a married person. And this, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, yes, now that you're saying that, I noticed these things about myself, like, so that's totally normal, but I doubt that it's always easy. Like if you're a financial planner and like you're listening to this, one of the big stats that we always talk about is that most widows, leave their financial advisor, 80% leave their financial advisor and go to work with a different advisor. And I think a lot of times this gets tossed around like, oh, advisors are awful and everybody's having these awful experiences. And so, yes, they can finally break away from this horrible existence. No, I think people just, they enter into widowhood and come out the other side as a different person. And sometimes you want different things. We don't leave our friend groups and change hobbies because we think, oh, I hated those friends and that hobby was stupid. But we evolve, we adapt, we grow. There are evolutions and revolutions, that we are going through. And while this is interesting and can be insightful, it can also be deeply isolating. And so thinking very thoughtfully, thinking very what I write about, what I think about, what I am forever trying to learn about and ultimately teach about, are those big identity shifts that are also connected to money. We sometimes talk about them first, about the money. Okay, somebody has divorced, we have to talk about separating assets. Okay, somebody is retiring, we need to figure out how to get this money in the portfolio in the sky, into my bank account. Oh, we've reached empty nest. Are we going to downsize? Oh, we have a career shift. Okay, do we need to change these other priorities? We oftentimes jump to perhaps what feels like, the more tangible thing. I'm just going to talk about the numbers. This is just addition, subtraction, a little time value of money, this sort of thing. And we think, okay, no big deal. But it is a big deal because it is our identity, is shifting at the same time. And so, financial planners, financial therapists, might be some of the first people that hear about this transition that's happening. They may hear before the friends, they may hear before your colleagues at work, know that you're actually going to retire. And so the financial planner at the same time that the client, can begin to feel this like shifting underfoot. And we can begin to talk about, these as hard times, as, financial questions, but we can also be open and flexible and curious, about what we're learning about ourselves, about our changing identities that we are experiencing, as to use a fun buzzword that people like to use these days, this liminal space, which just means like the threshold of change, that we are no longer what we were and we are not yet who we are becoming. And that there is actually a set of skills, a set of stages for understanding what that navigation might look like, and that we don't always have to be totally lost. There are discussions and conversations that we can also have along with having the addition, subtraction, time value of money questions. We can also have some of these identity questions, as we begin to shift and think about, what we really want, as an opportunity not just as a burden.
Meghaan, I really like that. On one side of it, you're seeing it as a financial advisor, which jumps straight to the dollars. Like, how does this impact the bottom line? What do we need to do? But what I also hear you saying in here is you're seeing it through the eyes of a person going through change, transitioning yourself, growing and changing. And what is that experience like? To me, I really want to hone in on that side of the coin. In fact, you've got a keynote called When Life Changes, So Does Money, Navigating Transitions Without Losing Yourself. I want to know from this audience that is experiencing that, who may not even be thinking how money has an impact on it. How does money impact those transitions?
It can make them harder and it can make them easier. I think that that's probably one of the big things, that money is at the end of the day just a tool, and so how well we use that tool to help us find our identity, to get on solid ground, on the other side. I think that this is always the question. I think a lot about women. I am one, thankfully. And, being a mother, being married, being a military spouse, being a daughter to aging parents, at the same time, socially, we have one of the largest wealth transitions, that's happening, that more women are going to have wealth than ever before, whether this is something that they chose, which is something that they inherited, which is something that they earned. But women being in the driver's seat when it comes to money is something that is different, is a transition that all of us, all women are going to experience, in one way or another. And wealth, as we become more in control, or the control that we have changes, this also changes our identity. Now that we are the stewards, what does this mean, to what we want to have happen? Now that we have the control, what does this mean to the relationships that exist around us? Now that I have choice and freedom, what is it that I actually wish to do? And is that somehow different than maybe what I was doing before, or perhaps an amplification of something that I deeply care about? But to the fact that I wish that I want there to be, and therefore I do this work to have more rooms, more people, more friendly, caring people, thoughtful conversation out in the world about these transitions, both financially and identity motivated, because I think a lot about what I do as a language. I speak a couple of languages, none of them particularly well. But I know what that's like. I know, like, when I want to be able to express myself and I can't, and how hard that can be. And money is a language, how we talk about that with people that we love, people that we're getting to know. And I think as we become more fluent in that, fluent in our identity change, fluent in what that means to the changes in our finances, then it helps us to really ask for whatever it is that we need. And that, I think that truly becomes the challenge. And this is a lot about what the presentation, it is about, that these changes are normal. This is some different ways to think about the space of liminality and how that relates across life, but how that also relates across our financial decisions.
Yeah, you've just shaped that in a way that I've honestly never thought of. And that is this identity transition. I think often when you're the one running the race, or as I sometimes like to say, the hamster on the wheel, just going as fast as you possibly can, you don't get the opportunity or privilege of standing off and reassessing and saying, what does this new role mean? Not just what does it look like? How do I do it? We jump to the how and the what, but like, who am I becoming through this experience? And how does that change me?
Even though these changes always feel different for everyone, there is structure to this, or there has been some research, of course, around like the structure of this. And I wish I could think of the name of this particular researcher, but they have done some great work on the stages of liminality. So again, liminal space being that threshold between what we were, that we're not anymore, but yet we're not what we will be. And so how to think about that. And so the first part is that separation, or sometimes called the ending. And so again, this could be the loss of a job. It could be a spouse. It could just be now you're the matriarch, or now you're the patriarch, and you're sort of the single decision maker when it comes to this financial thing. Or maybe for the first time in your life, you're married and you have to make decisions together, that this also is a separation. Like you weren't married, but now you are married, and now you're going to be making decisions with two people involved, whereas before it was one. So step one, ending a sort of separation. Then there's this waiting and threshold, which people like to jump over this. We like to get, I want to get as quickly to this other side of transition as possible, but that's not the best thing. And in fact, this is one of the most exciting things. And this is something that I have had to learn in my own life again and again and again and again, that this place of being actually just in the threshold, but in the between, in the in-between, is a place to ponder, is a place to ask, like, what do I really want? How do I feel? What new things excite me? What new things worry me? What's important? When I think about what I might want in the past, or what was important in the past, and what I think about what I might want in the future, this having someone to work with or talk to during this time, where I almost envision it, which is probably a weird way to vision it, but it's how I think about it, that like it's when we have those sort of out of body experiences where, you can kind of look down on yourself. You said, take a sideline, to what's actually going on. There is so much to be learned in just the feeling out of what is the sort of spacelessness at this point, which for some people can feel horrifying, and for some people can feel relief. And for others, it can just feel kind of, I don't know, like jello-y or something. And so it's trying to figure that out, but giving yourself the time and space to do that. So we talk about that particular stage. Then there's rising and like sometimes called the transition, where, okay, we've thought about a lot of different things. We've thought about how we think about them, and we've thought about how we feel about them. Now we're going to kind of experiment. We're going to experiment our way forward, which I love experimental thinking. It's almost kind of like magical thinking, and that it doesn't have to be forever. We can learn something from it. It's totally okay if it gets messed up, because you still learn something from that. It frees you of a lot of stress, but you really get to play with this new identity and what he or she or they or them might like. And I think that is such a fun period, and it can last for a long time. It can also be done in pieces and parcel, but this idea of experimenting in order to help us really figure out what feels right for this next identity that we're going to be taking on. Then there's, okay, we figure out something, I love this, about my new role. I love this about this particular aspect of my transition. And so I'm going to integrate this, I'm going to commit to some sort of choice, in my life as it relates to that. Maybe you've tried some new things. We're going to move forward with what works. And this is now going to be, a part of our new self. And then there's the last step, which is the reveling, which is more of like the celebratory stage. And this can honestly happen at a lot of different times. But it's celebrating the discovery, this new thing that you have established about yourself, that you become more aware of. And in many ways that now you want to share and acknowledge this, as part of the transition of who you are. And so I love that this has a practical aspect to it. I love that it has stages and steps and like different ways to think about this. What is oftentimes what feels like a very amorphous, very liquid, sensation, but it does have a process. If we can step back and like look at the river from above, not just experiencing being in the river, we can see that yes, it has twists and turns, but there is a beginning and an end. And we can get, from one side to the other. And so I particularly like this model. There's lots of models of change, but I really like this one, for thinking about identity, transition, and the support. This is the other thing, so we have these steps. We now have the language for how to talk about it. And in the presentation, there's lots of questions, lots of different things that you can try and do as you, A, figure out where you're at, B, sort of start to experiment with that a little bit, and then C, learn how to talk to people about it. I have said for a long time about the trans-theoretical model of change was another nerdy example of change that I wish that we taught that in school to children over trigonometry, because nobody uses trigonometry and everybody could benefit from understanding, how people change and how to be with people as they change. And so now that you now that you have this information, you understand where you're at in the process, you can ask for what you want. And I lean very much on the Super Communicators book recently by Charles Duhigg. It was a great book, but in there he uses help, hug, heard. Like those are like the three things that people ask for. And so it's like, if you realize, in this space, okay, I'm in the waiting, I'm in the threshold space, I need to ponder. Okay, I need somebody to hear me. Maybe you're in the reveling phase and you're like, I need to celebrate and I need a hug. Yeah. Maybe you are in the transition phase and you think, I need to talk to a financial advisor because I need help. I want to understand like how to fund this thing. But this gives us the words and gives us the structure, to be able to communicate what is oftentimes, again, something that we try to treat like a math equation, but it is also a big shift in our identity. And if we have the words for that, we can do a lot better job, communicating what it is that we want and need.
Meg, this is where I love the researcher, the practitioner, the person all coming together to see this process, because you bring a framework that is unique and applying it directly. And that's what I feel this takeaway is. Now, let me ask you one question here, because you just gave us a lot to chew on. What is one small shift that makes a really big difference for people?
Self-help is for suckers. Self-help is an industry. Self-help is meant to keep you alone and needing help. The antidote to this is find a good listener, find a helper, find someone who wants to give you a high five on a great day and a hug on a difficult day, or maybe a high five and a hug, on a good day or bad, whatever. Sometimes people just need hugs and high fives all the time. But I don't do this alone. We are not meant to do these things alone. I like these frameworks and I like these conversational tools because I think it brings us back to what is the most important thing. And even what began our conversation today, that maybe in the rise of information and the rise of knowledge everywhere, as maybe scary and strange and weird and not great as some of those things are, if it drives us back to really loving to talk to each other, then I'm all for it, because I just think it's important, to say it, again and again, that, when you're trying to convince others, when you're trying to convince yourself, when you're talking to someone, well, now I talk to you, Mary, and I'm like, yeah, here's this thing that I'm thinking about. And you're like, well, did you also think about, this and this and this? But hey, I really liked it, when you said this and this, it matters, to be in communication with other people. This LLMs and Twitter, jury is still out on Twitter. I'm pretty much sure it's not good for you. So, but LLMs, that people have only been using these for a very short period of time. They are just tools, but the tool that humans need, that we have always needed, that we have always relied on, is that we would talk to another person and they would help us, with cognition. They would help us with empathy. They would help us with connection and decision making and question, our identity and our growth and our heartbreak and our joy and our money, and at the end of the day, we still get so much more from calling our best friend, from talking to our mom, from talking to a partner or a teacher. And in times of transition, reach for connection. Do not just reach for consumption. If you really want an answer and you want to be supported along the way, what you need is a friend and someone to talk to. And listening to a presentation like mine can help you, not necessarily on the friend part, that's kind of up to you, but I can definitely help you to know what to talk about and how to ask for it.
Well, and taking friends at the end of that presentation. That's what I heard, right?
Yeah, take friends to the presentation. Good idea. Yeah, all friends welcome.
If you want to learn more about Meghaan and bring this keynote to your audience, visit Financial Behavior Keynote /speakers to find everything you need. Now, Meg, I need to ask you a final question, because this whole time I've been thinking a lot about your blog. You have a blog called Less Lonely Money, and it really is meant, I feel like what you've just shared with us today is it's meant to bring people together. It's to help them find out. Tell us more why you started this and what it is for the world.
I started it because I remember living in Spain during COVID. And I remember when the general surgeon came out and said that loneliness was killing people to the tune of, loneliness is as bad for you as 15 cigarettes a day. And I thought to myself in my little apartment in Spain at the time, living through COVID and how loneliness, was affecting me, that I obviously can't change loneliness for the world. But in my little corner of the world, my little dorky, money-filled corner of the world, this is often a very dark corner for very many people for very good reasons. But it is a place that I could make less lonely. I could teach people, I could talk about, I could give people structure and scripts and ideas and blogs that they could read and think to themselves, who can I talk to about this? There are often lots of lists of questions about things you might want to ask yourself, things you might want to ask your financial advisor, things you could ask your partner. So it's trying to, in the small corner that I can affect, trying to get rid of loneliness. And money tends to be, again, a very lonely topic for very many people. And if I can help make talking about money less lonely, maybe this will have, a downstream third order effect on just helping people to feel like coming back into communication, even when the communication is hard, even when the communication is about a hard thing, that this will actually bring us together.
Well, my response is thank you. Thank you for having the courage to put it out there. If you haven't subscribed, I highly encourage you to subscribe to her newsletter. And it just brings up topics that no one else is willing to touch right now in a deeper way. It really resonates with me because, quite frankly, that's why I started Financial Behavior Keynote, is I have a tiny little segment of the world. And I knew that joining together, your segment with my segment, with more segments, like all of us together, really open up that blue ocean mentality and just have that ability to reach someone in the far off reaches of the world. And so if you're listening to this podcast today and this spoke to you, we want you to hear more of this. Please subscribe to this podcast, share it with a friend or a partner that needs to hear it right now. And please continue to come back and ask these good questions, ask these hard questions, and receive that from one another. We're so grateful that you're here. And please subscribe to our show, Financial Behavior Thought Leaders, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.